Hi there, Jonathan here. The following talk is offered freely to ensure that no one is ever denied access to these practices and to these teachings. If you feel inspired to make a donation to support this offering, you can go to my website where you can also sign up for a monthly newsletter designed to support you in your practice. That's at www.jonathanfoust.com. Thank you and enjoy. Since we're here in a Unitarian church, I know we've got a lot of old hippies out there. You may remember at Woodstock there was a Swami who gave a benediction, Swami Satchidananda. He was one of the very first teachers to come from India to teach about yoga philosophy, and he was quite an instrumental fellow. He was the founder of Yogaville, which is just a little bit south of the city here. He once came to my ashram a number of years ago, and he was talking about habits, and he was talking about smoking. And he said, he was a very hip guy. He said, I mean, this smoking, not that smoking. I thought, wow, that's a hip yogi. But he was once asked by someone in the media, they said, what is your opinion of this situation as a Hindu? There was this long pause, and he said, I don't think I'm a Hindu. I think I'm an undo. And whenever anyone asks me, are you a Buddhist? I don't think of myself as a Buddhist. I don't call myself a Buddhist. If anything, I think I'm an undo. As I think we all are. It's about undoing our false concepts, about undoing our stories to find out what's true and what's real. And there's a paradox, because this practice can so powerfully deconstruct what's not real. Having just come from the IMCW spring retreat and having sat with over 100 people and done interviews, I'm in awe of what this practice can do. What this practice reveals is where you are stuck, where you're caught, where you're suffering. And it helps you, as you settle the mind and pay attention, to really see into the nature of what it is that's between you and feeling free. And to see it clearly, to transcend your embellishments and your preferences and your stories, to come in contact with what's true. And then the possibility of letting that go. And when you let go, something magical occurs. There's spaciousness, there's possibility. You tap into what Deepak Chopra calls the field of infinite possibility. When that tightly bound sense of I and mine either loosens up or falls away, something comes forward. So I wanted to talk a little bit about something that's a little bit paradoxical around the practices that lead to greater happiness and greater freedom and possibly to liberation. And that is moral conduct, the teachings around ethics. So easily in the West, our perception of the ethical behavior is through the lens of thou shalt not. And I'd like to talk a little bit tonight about first the importance of knowing what you want, having a goal. And then what you want, to figure out the best roadmap and the rules that are going to help you to get there. And then to talk a little bit as we explore what are called the precepts, or the guidelines for wholesome living. The importance of doing a ruthless self-assessment. to really ask yourself, how in alignment are you with these guidelines? And how do these guidelines match for where you are in your life? It's not hard and fast. It's very relative. So I hope to dive into that. A lot of times when I meet people, I just ask them, well, what do you want? What do you want in life? And sometimes people will say, well, I want a new job, or I want to be in a relationship, or they'll say, I want out of this relationship, or I want to have a child, or someone will say, I just want my kids to get out of the house, go to college. I want to retire and be in comfort. Which reminded me of, I saw a friend from my ashram days, and he had a big smile on his face. He said, I just met with my financial advisor and figured out my retirement plan. I said, wow, what is it? He said, I'm going to work till I'm dead. But it is a very powerful question to ask yourself, what do you really want? We all want a quality of life. We all want to provide for our families, but what is it that's calling you forward? And there are great ways to do that. You may know the rocking chair test. To imagine yourself sitting on your rocker when you're 102 and looking back on your life and asking, what was important? What did you value? And that can be helpful. But ultimately, I think what we really want is to be happy. There's a difference between form and essence. There's the form is the job you have, the friends you have, the things you do, the money you have in the bank. But the essence of what we're looking for is happiness. We are sort of driven to cultivate a sense of contentment. Of course, we seek it through all kinds of strange ways. In fact, part of what puzzled the Buddha after his awakening was seeing how everyone was looking for happiness in exactly the wrong way. That they were looking through happiness through sensual fulfillment, thinking that things were going to make them happy when it's not that at all. That it's about finding a way to be happy inside no matter what the externals are. Oh, wow, that feels good, doesn't it? That just made me happy. The elimination of whatever that was. I forget who it was. There was some philosopher who said that everything you do is designed to soothe your anxiety. And there's a lot to that. Everything you do, to some degree, is to soothe your anxiety. And I think we could sort of flip it and say, to cultivate a greater sense of happiness. So then the question is, if you're looking for real happiness, the happiness that's not dependent on external conditions, well, that requires kind of an extraordinary way of paying attention in your life. And that kind of leads us to the roadmap. So this talk is the second talk on what are called the 10 perfections. And the 10 perfections are simply qualities that you can cultivate that reflect what it means to be fully alive in your life. And one of them is to look at your behavior, whether your behavior is in alignment with what you really want. So there was a time in my life when I was really into super learning techniques. I was reading a lot of neuro-linguistic programming, and I was very excited around something called modeling. And basically what modeling says is look for someone who has what you want, do exactly what they do, and you'll have what they have. So the idea is if you want to learn something, find someone who's already doing it, study them intensely. And then you'll find yourself learning at a kind of a really rapid rapid pace. So as I was living in the ashram so many decades ago, I was really enamored with the healing arts. I was studying lots of different techniques of hands-on healing and really loved it. And there was one fellow who was leading a training where we were learning these special techniques. And people came from all over to have sessions with this guy. He was an extraordinary healer. So I had this opportunity to model him. So he had this way where he would sort of turn his head to the side and kind of and breathe, and I would do that, and I would walk like he walked, and then I would have him do something on me, then I would do it back and say, did I get that right? And so over maybe 8 hours of kind of intensive study of really just trying to be this guy. There was another senior body worker, and we were doing a trade, and I started to do some work on him, and he said, my God, you feel exactly like this guy. And I thought that really excited me, a way that we can really learn through modeling. And there's a very interesting element here when we look toward spiritual traditions. The analogy that my friend Pat Coffey often talks about is a coral reef. And when you look at a coral reef, it's just mostly skeletons, except for the outer edge, where there's aliveness. And the reef grows through the very edge of aliveness. And yet it's all based on all those generations that have come before. And it's a really exciting thing, particularly when you look at how the Dharma or these teachings is sort of evolving and changing in our culture. As I've said before, this kind of ancient tradition is now, 10,000 studies being done on it. The functional MRIs and the double-blind studies exploring what these techniques actually do to your brain and to your nervous system. And the expression of the Dharma is very different now than it was, 2,000 years ago. But at the same time, we can look back and reflect on those who have practiced before, and we don't necessarily have to reinvent it. We can look at the suggestions that are offered from those who have practiced diligently in the years before. There's a phrase that says, it's part of what are called the 5 daily reflections, which I'm looking forward to sharing with you. But one of those reflections is, I am born of my actions. I am sustained by my actions. Everything I think and do, kind or cruel, that I will become. So it's a reflection on karma, on cause and effect. That all the causes and conditions of your life have brought you to this moment. And what you do from this moment forward will impact the rest of your life. So as you sow, so shall you reap. And then the question becomes, well then what are the actions that are the most skillful? What are the actions that will protect a practice that can help you become more alive and become more happy? Every great tradition out there has riverbanks, ethical guidelines. We have the 10 Commandments in Christianity. Yoga has what are called the yamas and niyamas, which are kind of identical to the 10 Commandments. It's very interesting to look at those. And they are the observances and the restraints. The things you focus on doing, the things you focus on not doing. In Islam, there's a moral code laid out in the Quran. In the Jewish faith, the Torah speaks of what to do and what not to do. And again, as I said, that from the West, we tend to look at these as thou shalt not. If you screw up, there's punishment. There's hell. There's something to pay for not obeying these commandments. But the Eastern interpretation is radically different. It's actually more of a description of an awake person. You'll have better meditations if you're not killing people. Your mind will be a little bit less disturbed if you're not stealing from others. So before this retreat, we have last week, we have over 100 people all coming into community, all sitting in a big room, kind of shoulder to shoulder. And in order to create the most optimal environment we can, as happens in all retreats, first there's a reflection on what are called the refuges. And that is a reminder that when you feel lost in your practice, when you feel lost in life, that there are three things to remember. And they're referred to classically as the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, which can be simply translated as being awake, being aware of what's true, and being aware of love, being aware of the community. The second thing we do is we do a reflection on the precepts. And these are part of the 5 observances that are part of kind of classical Buddhist practice. The first one is to abstain from killing or to protect life. The second is to abstain from stealing or to practice generosity or social justice. The third is to abstain from sexual misconduct. And that's to protect individuals and families and children. The fourth is to abstain from lying, which is more about loving speech. And the last is to abstain from intoxicants that might cloud the mind. And you can sense perhaps how holding to these precepts can create a really safe environment. To know that there is an intentionality for kindness. To know that others are abstaining from stealing, so you don't have to worry about your meditation cushion being taken. To abstain from sexual misconduct, to know that you're safe. There's an intention for physical safety. The abstaining from lying is pretty easy because we're all in silence. That's kind of handled. And to abstain from intoxicants so that we can all really cultivate a clear mind. Of course, these guidelines support us when we're not on retreat as well. And we're confronted with moral dilemmas all the time. We have moral choices. So in order to align your actions with your goals, it's important to reflect on what you're doing and whether it's in alignment or not, to do an assessment. And this practice of assessment, self-assessment, is really critical. As I've quoted many times, one of my teacher's teacher, at the end of his life, as he was returning back to India after a very kind of illustrious career as a renunciate and a swami, he was asked, what is the highest quality of a spiritual seeker? And his response surprised me, because he didn't say, whatever you're enjoying, stop it, work harder. He said that the highest quality of a spiritual seeker is self-observation without judgment. And that's such an important part of a practice. The capacity to observe the self without judgment and to see clearly. As I was raised a Quaker, and there's a story told of William Penn, the first governor of Pennsylvania, who was a Quaker, and George Fox, who was the charismatic leader of the Quakers. They were having a conversation, and the Quakers, of course, were really big into nonviolence and simplicity. And William Penn wore a ceremonial sword. And he said to George Fox, I really like wearing my sword. This is part of the office, and I just like having my sword. And I love George Fox's response. He said, wear it as long as you can. And I think what happens, what I've certainly seen in my life and what I see for others in their life, that as you continue to sensitize yourself in this practice, as you begin to see more clearly, many people report how their life begins to change. That there were things that were very satisfying before that aren't so satisfying now. Or there were things they told themselves they really wanted that just don't seem that important anymore. And so your life begins to change. And with it, your relationship to the precepts may change as well. There's a fascinating thing when you look at the precepts. In any tradition, you have the fundamentalists. And basically, the fundamentalists say, if you disagree with me, you're my enemy. And then you have on the other end of that spectrum the mystics, who are so attuned to the internal experience that outwardly kind of anything matches, anything can fit. So you have this incredible span. The Jain monks in India, in regard to the first precept of non-killing, they're amazing. They wear a muslin over their face so they don't accidentally breathe in a bug. And when they walk, they use a broom to ensure they don't harm any creatures as they walk. And for them, that's living that precept. On the other hand, I sat with Tibetan teachers, one Tibetan teacher in particular who talked with utter delight of the joy of sinking his teeth into a yak steak. Where's the guideline in there? So it's all kind of a sliding scale. In some traditions, if you're caught stealing, your hand is chopped off. In some traditions, if there is any form of what's perceived as sexual misconduct, think of the persecution of gay men in Chechnya. Unbelievable. The application of that particular precept, if you will. In terms of intoxicants, you have the Seventh-day Adventists or the Mormons, which are completely abstaining, or others who no medications are allowed whatsoever. And then we have traditions on the other end of the spectrum where the ayahuasca ceremonies, the use of plant medicine. So reflecting on the precepts is an important thing to reflect on. In regard to the precept of non-killing, what I've noticed in my life, I grew up on a farm and raising animals, and in college I managed a 500-head herd, which was expressly for the marketplace. I grew up in a family of hunters where meat was essential to our family. And then personally, and not judging anyone for their choice, I got to the point where I just couldn't do that anymore. So having gone sort of the vegan route, I have a very different relationship toward that precept personally. As people reflect on this precept of killing, there are some people who feel that living in a culture where there's so much military action through the world. Being raised a Quaker, there were many people in the meeting where I was, raised who refused to pay a certain percentage of their tax as a non-compliance toward that. So everyone needs to find their comfort place. And to reflect on stealing or not taking what is freely given. As I've reflected on this one. And it's interesting to explore this from the perspective of being a member of the dominant culture. There are things that I expect that non-dominant cultures have no access to. Am I taking and keeping too much because of my privilege? It's easy to blame other people for hoarding, but then it's helpful for me to look at myself. How much am I holding on to and not giving freely? Reflecting on sexual misconduct. There's a very interesting teaching about kind of the relative plane, how there's our actions, which is kind of the grossest expression of who you are. And then there's your speech, which is the words that you use. And then the most subtle form are thoughts. And that becomes a very interesting reflection. To what degree do I objectify others? Through my thoughts or my speech or my actions. I had a celibacy vow for almost 7 years, and we were always encouraged to think of the opposite sex as either a mother or sister, kind of as a way to sort of transmute that process. And again, regarding intoxicants, again, that's for each of us to find our way. Our species has used plant medicines for eons. Where does that fit in? And so, reflecting on the precepts, and we'll do this in a little bit, but it's been very interesting for me as I practice in different traditions. Going to like an very orthodox retreat, where the precepts they're pretty heavy. They're like, you don't do this, don't do that, don't do that. And then having done a month-long at Spirit Rock in California, where the precepts are interpreted a little bit differently, with the intention to do no harm. To be aware of sexuality with the intention to do no harm. To be aware of the use of intoxicants and to do no harm. So all of this is so up for not just interpretation, but for you to really deeply sense what most resonates for you. So I'd like to read a very interesting interpretation of these 5 precepts, and as it'll be kind of a long kind of reflection. I'll read them and offer you some time just to kind of reflect on them. But before I do, kind of as our close, so much of practice comes back to intention. What is it that you really, really want in this life? Knowing that you and everyone you love will die in no particular order, what is most important? And what are the practices and the observances and the restraints that are going to help you cultivate that which you most want? That's what these are all about. I'm around a lot of people who are wanting a relationship or struggling in relationships, and I've always felt that there's some point in a relationship where the conversation really kind of goes like this. Let me tell you what lights me up. let me tell you how I would like to live out the rest of my days, knowing I have no control over how many I have. And then I'd like to hear from you. What lights you up? How would you like to live the rest of your days? And then let's talk about whether we're a match or not. But that reflection is so helpful. And what do you want? What lights you up? How do you want to live your life? So these 5 precepts are an interpretation by Thich Nhat Hanh. And they're really wonderful. And just to kind of review the headlines with you, if you sort of translate "thou shalt not kill" to this, to cultivate reverence for life. To explore what true happiness means, what true love means, what loving speech means, and what nourishment and healing means. So if you like, you can close your eyes, and I'd like to share these with you. So with your eyes closed, you might take a few deep breaths. This first is in regard to reverence for life. Aware of the suffering caused by the destruction of life, I am committed to cultivating the insight of compassion and learning ways to protect the lives of people, animals, plants, and minerals. I am determined not to kill and not to support any act of killing in the world, in my thinking or in my way of life. Seeing that harmful actions arise from anger, fear, and greed, which in turn come from dualistic and discriminative thinking, I will cultivate openness, non-discrimination, and non-attachment to views in order to transform violence, fanaticism, and dogmatism in myself and in the world. The second precept is a reflection on cultivating true happiness. Aware of the suffering caused by exploitation, social injustice, stealing, and oppression, I am committed to practicing generosity in my thinking, my speaking, and my acting. I am determined not to steal and not to possess anything that should belong to others. And I will share my time, energy, and resources with those who are in need. I will practice looking deeply to see that the happiness and suffering of others are not separate from my own happiness and suffering. That true happiness is not possible without understanding and compassion. Reflecting on true love. Aware of the suffering caused by sexual misconduct, I am committed to cultivating responsibility and learning ways to protect the safety and integrity of individuals, couples, families, and society. Knowing that sexual desire is not love, and that sexual activity motivated by craving always harms myself as well as others. I am determined not to engage in sexual relations without true love and deep long-term commitment made known to my family and friends. Seeing that body and mind are one, I am committed to learning appropriate ways to take care of my sexual energy and to cultivate loving kindness, compassion, joy, and inclusiveness. Cultivating loving speech. Aware of the suffering caused by unmindful speech and the inability to listen to others, I am committed to cultivating loving speech and compassionate listening in order to relieve suffering and promote reconciliation and peace in myself and among other people. Knowing that words can create happiness or suffering, I am committed to speaking truthfully, using words that inspire confidence, joy, and hope. And finally, reflecting on nourishment and healing. Aware of the suffering caused by unmindful consumption, I'm committed to cultivating good health, both physical and mental, for myself, my family, and my society, by practicing mindful eating, drinking, and consuming. I will look deeply into how I consume. So you might just take these final moments to reflect on these qualities of how you might, in your own way, cultivate a reverence for life. That which you might do to cultivate a deeper sense of happiness and love. How to deeply care for yourself and all those you know. You might just take these final minutes to feel the breath. And simply to sense how you might embody that which you most seek, to align your actions with your deepest desires, to be happy and free. And when you're ready, you can deepen the breath. When you're ready, you can let your eyes open. This idea of riverbanks, I always find a helpful analogy. I always go back to my experience on the river, that where I live on the Potomac River, it's very wide. But as soon as you hit Great Falls, you hit Mather Gorge, where suddenly the riverbanks get very narrow, and suddenly the river gets very fast and focused. This is a conversation between Ananda, who was the Buddha's assistant through his life. And they were having a conversation about personal conduct and virtue, if you will. And so Ananda says, what is the reward of wholesome morality? And the Buddha says, freedom from remorse. And Ananda says, and freedom from remorse? Joy. And of joy? Rapture. And of rapture? Tranquility. And of tranquility? Happiness. And of happiness? Concentration. And concentration? Vision and knowledge according to reality. And of vision and knowledge according to reality? Turning away and detachment. And of turning away and detachment? The vision and knowledge regarding deliverance. So this is a description of what are kind of referred to like the deepening states that occur in concentration. First, the arising of joy, and then sensing what's beneath that, of tranquility, of happiness, and seeing deeper and deeper into the nature of reality. And the foundation of all of this is how you use your time, how you focus your time. The more you can reflect on your actions being aligned with what you want, the more inevitably you will see more clearly into your life and into the nature of reality. That's a little of the context of the precepts. So I'll share these with you in the email if you'd like to reflect on that language from Thich Nhat Hanh. It's such a beautiful departure from the thou shalt not punishing approach to life.